Imagine driving down a winding mountain road in a vintage cruiser, the wind in your hair, and a literal spear made of solid steel aimed directly at your heart. It sounds like a scene from a twisted thriller, but for decades, this was just the standard reality of being a driver. You see, the history of the automobile isn't just a timeline of shiny chrome and horsepower. It's a graveyard of design choices that were eventually written out of existence in blood. Today, we're looking at features that defined entire generations of car culture, features that enthusiasts still obsess over, that you will never ever see on a showroom floor again. Some of these were banned because they were poisoning the planet, while others were quite literally turning minor fender benders into fatal events. Stick around, because number 13 involves a common interior part that was secretly a jagged blade waiting to strike. And you won't believe it was ever legal. Let's count down 30 strange car features that are illegal now. 30. Hard plastic baby seats, the steel loops. Before modern ISOFIX and latch systems, car seats were less about safety and more about containment. In the 1950s and 60s, these were often just plastic chairs with metal hooks that literally hung over the back of the front bench seat. They weren't bolted down, they were just perched there. In a collision, these seats acted as a catapult. Because they lacked any structural tethering to the vehicle frame, the seat and the child would be launched into the dashboard or through the windshield. Modern standards now legally mandate multi-point anchoring systems and energy-absorbing foam. Selling a seat that just hooks onto a chair is now a criminal offense in the juvenile products industry. 29. Knee knocker steering columns. In the early days of automotive design, the steering column was a solid one-piece steel shaft that ran directly from the steering wheel to the front axle. It was effectively a harpoon, aimed at the driver's chest. In a front-end collision, the engine would push that rigid rod straight back into the cabin. This design earned the nickname the Spear because of how it impaled drivers during impacts. By the late 1960s, collapsible steering columns became a legal requirement. These are designed to fold like an accordion or telescope into themselves upon impact, absorbing energy rather than transferring it to your ribcage. Today, a rigid, non-collapsible column is strictly illegal for road use. 28. Autronic eye. In the 1950s, GM introduced the Autronic eye, a photo tube mounted on the dashboard that looked like a small spaceship. It was designed to automatically dim your high beams when it sensed oncoming headlights. The technology was primitive. It couldn't distinguish between a car's headlights, a reflective street sign, or even a bright porch light. It would often flash oncoming drivers or suddenly cut the lights to low on a pitch-black curve, leaving the driver blind. While automatic high beams exist today, the original unregulated versions were phased out because they weren't fail-safe. Modern law, Federal Motor Vehicle Safety Standard 108, now strictly regulates how and when automated lighting can react. You can no longer have a dumb sensor that leaves light distribution to chance. It must meet millisecond response standards and specific beam patterns that the old vacuum tube eyes simply couldn't achieve. 27. Open-air rumble seats. Common in the 1920s and 30s, the rumble seat was a folding exterior seat located where the trunk should be. It allowed extra passengers to sit outside the main cabin, fully exposed to the elements and the road. There were zero safety restraints, no rollover protection, and no protection from debris. If the car flipped, the passengers in the rumble seat were almost guaranteed to be crushed. As speeds increased and safety laws matured, the exposed passenger concept was phased out. Modern law requires all passengers to be seated within a protected safety cage with dedicated seatbelts. The mother-in-law seat is now a relic that would never pass a basic safety inspection. 26. Asbestos brake pads and clutches. For decades, the miracle mineral asbestos was the industry standard for brake linings because of its incredible heat resistance. However, every time a driver hit the brakes, a tiny cloud of microscopic asbestos dust was released into the air and onto the mechanics working on the cars. As the link between asbestos and deadly lung diseases like mesothelioma became undeniable, the EPA and global regulators moved to ban its use in automotive friction materials. Today, it is strictly illegal to manufacture new vehicles with asbestos-based components. We now use semi-metallic or ceramic compounds that stop the car just as well, without the side effect of poisoning the mechanics and the environment. 25. Vacuum-powered windshield wipers. Early wipers weren't electric. They ran off the engine's manifold vacuum. This created a dangerous paradox. When you accelerated or climbed a hill, the vacuum pressure dropped, causing the wipers to slow down or stop entirely. Safety regulators eventually banned this design, realizing that visibility shouldn't be optional during heavy engine load. Today, electric wipers are a legal requirement to ensure consistent performance regardless of how you drive. 24. Fixed hood ornaments. Once the ultimate status symbol, ornaments like the Jaguar leaping cat were essentially jagged, chrome spikes bolted to the hood. In pedestrian collisions, these unyielding pieces of art could cause horrific injuries that the bumper alone wouldn't have. Modern safety laws now ban ornaments that don't give way upon impact. This led to the engineering of spring-loaded hinges for Mercedes stars and the famous Rolls-Royce retraction system, which hides the ornament in milliseconds to prevent injury. 23. Floor-mounted high beam switches. For decades, the switch to turn on your high beams wasn't on the steering column. It was a small metal button on the floorboard, just to the left of the clutch or brake pedal. You had to stomp on it with your left foot to toggle your brights. It was a major safety hazard for two reasons. First, in a panic situation or a heavy storm, having to move your foot away from the area of the pedals just to see better was dangerous. Second, because of their location, these switches were prone to heavy corrosion from salt, mud, and snow. They would frequently short out or stick, either leaving the driver with no lights at all or permanently blinding other drivers with high beams that wouldn't turn off. Modern ergonomics and safety standards have moved all critical driving controls to the hands-on wheel area. While not banned by a specific name, modern crash test and ergonomic regulations, ISO standards, effectively require these switches to be on the steering column or dash to ensure the driver's feet never have to hunt for a button during a nighttime emergency. 22. Front row bench seats. The front bench seat was a drive-in movie icon, turning the car into a mobile sofa. By removing the center console, it allowed 3 passengers to sit up front and created an open, social cabin. However, the bench seats succumbed to 3 legal and safety hurdles. 3-point seat belts. It was nearly impossible to safely restrain a middle passenger with modern belt standards. Side impact regulations. Engineers needed to fill that open space with structural reinforcement to protect occupants during T-bone collisions. Airbag deployment. You cannot effectively protect a middle passenger with an airbag that is positioned for a driver or a far-right passenger. The 2013 Chevy Impala was the last sedan to offer this feature. Today, that space is legally mandated for safety structures and specialized restraint systems. 21. Pop-up headlights. From the Mazda Miata to the Lamborghini Countach, pop-up headlights defined the cool aesthetic of the 80s and 90s. They allowed for low, aerodynamic hood lines that were impossible with bulky fixed glass. By the early 2000s, 2 major issues led to their demise. Pedestrian safety. Regulators argued the sharp mechanical blades of the headlight housings caused unnecessary trauma during collisions. Mechanical reliability. If the motors failed, drivers were left blind at night. The 2004 Lotus Esprit and Corvette C5 were the last to feature them. Today's more rounded bug-eye sports car designs are a direct result of these legal mandates for fixed, pedestrian-friendly lighting. 20. Leaded gasoline requirements. In the mid-20th century, ethyl gasoline treated with tetraethyl lead was the industry standard. It prevented engine knock and boosted power, but at a catastrophic cost to public health. As cars drove, they spewed microscopic lead particles into the air. This potent neurotoxin settles in soil and enters the bloodstream, with studies linking lead exposure to lower IQ scores and increased violent crime rates across entire generations. The global ban on leaded fuel for road use concluded in the 90s. Today, it is strictly illegal to manufacture a road car requiring leaded fuel or to sell the fuel for highway use. 19. Single-circuit braking systems. In vintage cars, the entire braking system relied on a single hydraulic loop. If a tiny leak formed in just one rubber line, the entire system lost pressure instantly. Pressing the brake pedal would result in nothing. No brakes on any wheel. Since the late 1960s, laws have mandated dual circuit systems. This design splits the brakes into 2 independent loops. If one line fails, the other retains at least 50% of your stopping power. Modern electronic distribution has made brakes even safer, rendering the all-or-nothing single-line setup a relic of criminally negligent engineering. 18. Absence of headrests. Vintage low-back seats from the early 60s offered an airy, open cabin aesthetic, but they were effectively whiplash machines. In a rear-end collision, the seat pushed the body forward while the unsupported head snapped backward with violent force. This design caused thousands of permanent spinal and neck injuries annually. Consequently, headrests became a legal requirement in 1969. Modern regulations are now so strict that headrests must meet specific height and proximity standards to pass safety tests. Today, selling a car without them is a fundamental violation of automotive safety laws. 17. Rear-facing jump seats. In the 70s and 80s, the way back of a station wagon was a childhood staple. These rear-facing seats turned the trunk into a private clubhouse for kids, but they were a safety nightmare in practice. The seats were positioned directly in the vehicle's rear crumple zone. In a rear-end collision, children were the first point of impact, protected only by a thin layer of glass and a metal tailgate. Modern crash test standards now require every passenger to be shielded by dedicated impact zones and sophisticated restraint systems. Because these jump seats can't survive a modern safety audit, they've been entirely phased out of the market. 16. Rear bumper mounted gas tanks. The infamous Ford Pinto remains the poster child for this design, but it was once common across the industry. To maximize trunk space, manufacturers often tucked gas tanks just inches behind the rear bumper. In a rear-end collision, the bumper acted like a hammer, crushing the tank against the rear axle. This frequently caused the tank to burst, with friction sparks, turning the car into an inescapable furnace. Modern regulations now mandate that fuel tanks be placed in a protected zone, typically under the rear seat and forward of the rear wheels, shielded by the car's heaviest structural components. Placing a fuel source in a designated crush zone is now strictly illegal. 15. External suicide doors. Originally hinged at the rear for a graceful exit, these doors earned their morbid nickname for a reason. In an era of primitive latches, if a rear hinge door wasn't perfectly closed, high-speed airflow could catch the leading edge and rip it open. Passengers attempting to pull the door shut were often yanked out of the moving vehicle. Furthermore, if a passing car clipped an open suicide door while a passenger was exiting, it would slam shut like a heavy metal trap. While brands like Rolls-Royce still feature rear-hinged doors, they are now governed by strict legal mandates. Electronic interlocks. It must be physically impossible to open the doors while the car is in motion. Advanced latches. Backup manual systems are required to prevent accidental deployment. The unlocked and unrestrained suicide doors of the 1940s are now strictly forbidden. 14. Dashboard record players. Before Spotify or even 8-tracks, Chrysler introduced the Highway Hi-Fi in 1956, a literal phonograph mounted under the dash. While a miracle of mid-century tech, it was a safety disaster. Beyond the extreme distraction of swapping delicate vinyl records while driving, these units were heavy, cast-iron machines mounted directly in the passenger knee-strike zone. In a collision, the record player became a lethal, unyielding, blunt object. Today, two legal barriers make these impossible. Distracted driving laws. Modern regulations strictly limit driver-operated mechanical interfaces. Interior impact standards. Everything in a modern cabin must be soft touch or designed to break away upon impact, the polar opposite of a 1950s turntable. 13. Metal interior window cranks and door handles. In a modern car, your door handles and window switches are usually plastic and recessed deep into the door panel. This isn't just to save money, it's a grim safety requirement. In the classic car era, these controls were solid, chrome-plated metal paddles or cranks that protruded several inches. During a side impact collision, these beautiful pieces of jewelry transformed into blunt force daggers. As the door was pushed inward, the metal handles would frequently puncture the ribs or internal organs of the occupants, like an Iron Maiden torture device from the medieval times. Modern safety standards now mandate that all interior hardware be flush-mounted to prevent snagging or piercing, energy-absorbing, made of materials that snap off or deform upon human impact, Those heavy protruding metal spikes are now a forbidden design choice, replaced by sleek, recessed plastic alternatives. 12. Exposed side-mounted spare tires. In the 1920s and 30s, mounting spare tires on front fenders or side steps was the height of rugged class. As speeds increased and streets became more crowded, these stylish additions became a massive liability. These exposed spares acted as a catch point for pedestrians and cyclists. If a car grazed a person, the protruding tire and its heavy metal mount would snag them, pulling them under the wheels rather than letting them roll off the vehicle. In a high-speed crash, the unshielded tires could also become 50-pound projectiles. Modern pedestrian protection laws mandate that a car's exterior remain as smooth as possible to minimize impact trauma. Between these safety regulations and modern aerodynamic standards, the side-mounted spare is now a forbidden design. 11. Rigid chassis and tank construction. The old automotive philosophy was that a stronger, more rigid car was a safer one. However, basic physics proved the opposite. When a 5,000-pound steel car hits an object, the rigid frame survives, but the kinetic energy is transferred directly to the passengers. Their internal organs continue moving at the speed of impact until they strike the rib cage or dashboard. Modern crumple zone laws now require cars to be weak in specific engineered locations. The front and rear of a modern vehicle are designed to accordion and crush, absorbing the energy of a crash before it reaches the cabin. Building a tank-like rigid car today is illegal because it effectively acts as a high-speed coffin for its occupants. 10. Automatic mousetrap seatbelts. In the late 80s and early 90s, U.S. passive restraint laws forced manufacturers to automate safety. To avoid the high cost of airbags, many installed motorized shoulder belts that automatically slid into place when the door closed. These mouse traps were a safety disaster for two main reasons. Submarining. Many drivers assumed the automatic shoulder belt was sufficient and neglected to buckle the manual lap belt. In a crash, the body would slide forward under the shoulder strap, often resulting in the belt catching the driver by the neck. Mechanical failure. In accidents, the motorized tracks often jammed, trapping occupants inside the vehicle. Once airbags became mandatory, these dangerous, unreliable systems were phased out in favor of the much safer manual three-point harness. 9. Swing-away steering wheels. In the mid-60s, Ford's swing-away steering wheel was the height of convenience, sliding 9 inches to the right to help drivers enter and exit the car. While a hit in the Thunderbird and Mustang, it introduced a catastrophic structural weakness. The locking pin that held the wheel in place could fail during a crash, causing the steering column to swing wildly or collapse toward the driver. Beyond the mechanical risk, the design made it impossible to house a modern airbag system or provide the rigid support required for a collapsible safety column. Today, while we have tilt and telescopic adjustments, the steering assembly must remain centered and locked to act as a stable reaction surface for the driver. The floating steering wheel is now a safety liability of the past. 8. Glove box minibars and magnetic dashboards. In the 1950s, drinking while driving was so socially accepted that car designers practically encouraged it. High-end Cadillacs offered beverage service options, featuring glove boxes with magnetic indentations specifically designed to hold metal shot glasses steady on the road. As the devastating reality of drunk driving fatalities became clear, these refreshment features were scrubbed from automotive design. Today, open container laws make it a crime to have accessible alcohol in a vehicle. 7. Non-laminated safety glass. In the early days of motoring, car windows were made of standard plate glass, the same kind used in houses. In a crash, this glass didn't just break. It shattered into massive, razor-sharp shards that acted like guillotines. In even minor accidents, drivers and passengers were frequently decapitated or mutilated by their own windshields. Eventually, the law mandated 2 specific types of safety glass: laminated glass, windshields. 2 layers of glass with a plastic inner layer that holds the shards together upon impact. Tempered glass, side windows. Heat-treated glass designed to shatter into tiny, relatively harmless pebbles instead of blades. Today, using anything other than certified safety glass is strictly illegal. The shards of death are now a dark chapter of automotive history, replaced by materials designed to protect rather than pierce. 6. No side impact protection beams. If you look at a car door from the 60s, it consists of two thin sheets of metal with a hollow space in between. In a side impact collision, there was absolutely nothing to stop another vehicle from crashing straight through the door and into the passenger's lap. Starting in the 1970s, regulations forced manufacturers to install heavy steel intrusion beams inside every door. These beams are engineered to catch the impacting vehicle and distribute the force throughout the car's reinforced frame rather than the occupant's body. Today, selling a car without these beams and the accompanying side curtain airbags is strictly illegal. The paper-thin doors of the classic era have been replaced by heavy, reinforced safety cells designed to survive a T-bone collision. 5. Sharp protruding bumpers, Dagmars. In the late 1950s, the jet age aesthetic turned bumpers into weapons. Designers added massive, bullet-shaped chrome protrusions, famously known as Dagmars, that mimicked the nose cones of rockets. While they gave cars a powerful, aggressive stance, they were a disaster for safety. Concentrated impact. In a pedestrian collision, these sharp steel points acted as spears, concentrating the entire force of the car into a single point, shattering limbs and causing trauma that a flat surface would have avoided. Zero energy absorption. Made of heavy-gauge steel and bolted directly to the frame, these bumpers didn't absorb energy. They functioned as rolling battering rams, transferring 100% of the impact force into the other vehicle or the pedestrians they struck. The enactment of the 5 miles per hour bumper rule in the early 1970s effectively killed these designs. Modern laws now require car exteriors to be softened and integrated with energy-absorbing plastic covers to protect both the vehicle and human bodies. 4. Non-recessed exterior door handles. On vintage cars, door handles were often ornate, chrome-plated levers or large push-button handles that stood several inches off the bodywork. While they were jewelry for the car and easy to grab, they were essentially mechanical hooks waiting for a victim. In accidents involving pedestrians or cyclists, these protruding handles were notorious for snagging clothing or limbs. Instead of a person being pushed away from the vehicle's path, they were often pulled under the wheels. There are even documented cases from the 1950s where these handles caught on passing vehicles during a sideswipe, causing the entire door to be ripped off its hinges. Modern safety regulations now mandate that door handles must be flush-mounted or recessed, sitting tight against the bodywork to prevent snagging. Rounded and breakaway. If they do protrude, like modern grab bar handles, they must feature specific radii and be designed to snap off or deform during an impact rather than acting as a hook. The elegant protruding chrome handles of the past are now a banned design hazard, replaced by the flap-style or recessed handles that define modern aerodynamics and safety. 3. Absence of anti-lock braking systems, ABS. For nearly a century, emergency braking was a high-stakes game of skill. If you slammed on the brakes on a wet or icy road, the wheels would lock up, turning the tires into sliding hockey pucks. In this state, you had zero steering control. No matter how much you turned the wheel, the car's momentum carried it straight into the obstacle. Drivers were taught to manually pump the brakes, a technique known as threshold braking, to prevent lockup. But in a panic, most drivers simply froze, mashed the pedal, and slid. ABS changed the game by using sensors to detect lockup and pumping the brakes hundreds of times per second, far faster than any human. This allows the driver to maintain full steering control even during a full emergency stop. Legal mandates. ABS was a luxury option for decades before becoming a legal requirement in the EU 2004 and the US 2012. Modern status: it is now illegal to manufacture a road car without a computer-controlled ABS. The old-school method of sliding and praying has been replaced by silicon and sensors. 2. Lack of emission control systems. If you teleported to a busy street in 1965, the first thing to hit you wouldn't be the style. It would be the smell. Before the 1970s, car engines were open systems that spat out a toxic cocktail of carbon monoxide, nitrogen oxides, and unburned hydrocarbons. Without catalytic converters or oxygen sensors, cars were literally poisoning the air, leading to the infamous smog eras, where cities like Los Angeles were frequently blanketed in a thick, brown, respiratory choking haze. The Clean Air Act transformed the legal landscape, mandating three-way catalytic converters to convert toxic gases into less harmful emissions. Closed-loop fuel injection, using sensors to perfectly balance the air-fuel ratio for a cleaner burn. Vapor recovery systems, to prevent raw gasoline fumes from escaping into the atmosphere. Today, a modern car's exhaust is often cleaner than the ambient air in some highly polluted cities. It is now a federal crime to tamper with or remove these systems, and manufacturing a vehicle without them is strictly forbidden. We traded the raw, unrefined roar of the 60s for the ability to breathe, and the law ensures there's no turning back. 1. The missing backup camera. For over a century, the area directly behind a car was a dead zone. No matter how many mirrors you adjusted, there was always a blind spot large enough to hide a small child or low obstacle. This led to thousands of tragic backover accidents every year, mostly in private driveways. In 2018, a landmark piece of U.S. legislation, the Cameron-Goldbranson Kids Transportation Safety Act, finally went into full effect. It mandated that every new car, regardless of its price or size, must be equipped with a rear-view backup camera. Every vehicle under 10,000 pounds must show a 10-foot by 20-foot zone directly behind the car when in reverse. This effectively made the blind rear end illegal. Even the most basic economy cars are now required to have a digital screen and a camera sensor. You can no longer sell a new car that relies solely on mirrors for reversing. This single mandate has done more to reduce low-speed pedestrian fatalities than almost any other tech in the last 2 decades. The era of guessing what's behind you is officially over. Which of these 30 features surprised you the most? It's incredible to realize that almost every one of these features was once considered standard or even a luxury. We look back at these cars with nostalgia, loving their lines and their mechanical simplicity. But the reality is that the road was once a much more violent and unpredictable place. Every law that banned these features was written in response to a tragedy, a lesson learned the hard way through accidents, injuries, and lost lives. We might miss the style of the pop-up headlights or the romance of the front row bench seat, but we certainly don't miss the era where a minor mistake meant a trip to the hospital. Modern cars are heavier, more complex, and strictly regulated, but they are also engineering marvels that protect us in ways our grandparents could never have imagined. As we move toward the future of self-driving cars and electric power, more of today's standard features will likely become illegal memories. Is there a feature on cars today that you think will be banned in the next 20 years? Let me know in the comments below. I read as many as I can. If you enjoyed this deep dive into automotive history, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe for more. It really helps the channel out. This is Retro Ride Registry. I'll see you in the next one.